Good afternoon. This is Miriam Glaze from Athlete Soul. Welcome to our Friday Industry Insight. Today we're going to be talking about the tech industry and job in technology. I have with me three former athletes from team handball, table tennis, and football. I will be introducing them in a second. As I do the introduction for our webinar, I'll let people join us slowly. Wanted to first of all let everybody know that the event is being recorded. As usual, it will be available on our website and on our YouTube channel if you want to check the event afterwards. You can ask questions throughout the whole event. I encourage you to do so by going into the chat box as well as the Q&A. Ask your question in writing. I'll take note of them and then I'll ask our guests at the end of our conversation. So we'll start with a conversation and me asking them question, and then we'll switch to the audience once you have any questions. Okay, so let's jump right in. I'm gonna start with Eric. Eric Finch is a team handball player. He's actually been competing for Team USA for the last 7 years in indoor team handball, and also beach handball. He actually recently played at the World Beach Game in Doha. Eric worked as an engineer for the last 3 years at both a large tech company and a small startup firm. And then he realized that engineering was probably not the long-term path for him, and then switched to technical sales with MariaDB, which is an open source database company. So Eric, welcome. Anything you want to add to this introduction?
No, that was great. I think that covers the high level, so I'm sure we'll get into it. But yeah, I'm in technical sales. I'm an account executive at MariaDB now. And yeah, it's an open source database company. So I'm mid-sized, about 250 people. So.
Great. All right, so our next guest is Han Xiao. Han was a table tennis player, competed also for Team USA in 4 World Championships, as well as the Pan American Games. He retired after graduating from the University of Maryland in 2008 with a degree in computer science and business management. He's been working as a software engineer ever since. He completed a master's degree in computer science from Johns Hopkins and is currently the chief engineer at Anthem Engineering, which is a small software service firm with contracts in both the public and private sector. Han, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Again, is there anything you want to add to that profile?
No, not a whole lot. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. You're the first table tennis player that we get, so we're pretty excited.
It's an honor.
And finally, we welcome Connor Ditz. He was the starting quarterback and team captain for the Falcons at the United States Air Force Academy. He majored in business management and administration. After college, Connor competed in the NFL with the Chicago Bears and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He began a career as an Air Force officer, serving for 5 years of active duty in logistic and life cycle management. And he's now a managing partner at Game Time Incorporated, which is an innovative tech company using data and analytics to connect athletes with opportunities. Welcome, Connor, and same question to you. Anything that you would like to add to your incredible profile?
No, you probably said more than I'll say on the whole call, so that was perfect. And it's funny, everyone on this call definitely has a technological background, and even though our company's doing tech, I'm definitely not a tech person myself, so I'll try to add value where I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, the whole purpose of today's call is to discuss and hear more about the tech industry as well as job in the tech industry. So we'll go from some of the technical side to like just the general industry and what to look forward to in it. Obviously, it's a growing industry, so I think an interesting time to be looking in tech and perhaps thinking about a career in this world. So maybe we'll start back with Eric. I wanted for each one of you to give us a little bit of background on what is your current job and how you got to that point. Maybe if you can tell us a little bit of your previous experiences in the space.
Yeah, so I started as an engineer at a large tech company doing kind of like high performance tests. So anything from like mobile electronics to aerospace applications. And I enjoyed it. I did a lot of customer facing support. So customers would call me when they were using our equipment and had like serious issues. But long story short, I wanted to try maybe a bit of a smaller company, and had a chance to kind of focus more in on my major specifically, which was like telecommunications based. And so I did that for a year, but ultimately was training at the same time, and got an opportunity to take 2019 to play kind of reconcentrated handball and play some overseas as well. So using the year off, I'd kind of been lukewarm about engineering for the long term. And I actually had a good friend of mine from my first job as an engineer that had transitioned to sales, had told me that I would be a good fit for it for a long time. And we stayed in touch. He actually works at the company that I'm at now. But I reached out to them. I was kind of interested in, I had used some open source technology in my previous jobs as well, but reached out to them. They had an open position for an SDR, which is kind of like the entry level to technical sales, or a lot of sales jobs, just sales development representative. And yeah, studied really hard for the interview, and have done well thus far, and recently moved into an account executive role. So
Got it.
so that kind of spans the last 5 years, I guess.
Yep. So you have a technical background that you eventually combine now in a position where you're using your technical side and your sales skills. So it's sort of like a mixed position, right?
Yeah, and I think, from an athletic standpoint, like I kind of quit training briefly when I started as an engineer, and really missed it. I suppose like way more than I thought. I wasn't sure if I was going to keep playing after I graduated. And this has been a really good combination. I mean, certainly my technical background helps. I think there was a competitive aspect that I wasn't able to tap into in engineering, and kind of having the, kind of like a results-oriented role, I think, in the framework of sales and like bringing in business has been very exciting for me. I think more so than I was able to find in engineering. So.
Great, thank you. Han, can you go through your past since college and where you've been working ever since?
Yeah, I have a pretty, I'd say, conventional path in technology, in that, my degrees are all related to, software and software engineering. Most of my jobs thus far have been just as a software engineer working on different types of application, done some government contracting. In my current role, I have a little bit more diverse set of responsibilities, in that I lead a software team, actually a cross-functional team of 10 people. They're not all software engineers, they're testers, they're program managers, so there are different types of people. I lead the entire project. And also, as sort of a part of senior leadership of a small company, there's also business development involved. There's sort of process improvement and performance development of employees involved. So I help drive a lot of that within the company as well. So definitely there's some diverse responsibilities in my day-to-day job now, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, so you're started pretty much in a very technical driven position, and eventually as you grow in your career, there are other responsibility that get added to that, right?
Yeah, so I would say, it seems to me that that's pretty typical in a lot of tech companies, is sort of the more senior you get in technical roles, a lot of companies try to drive people towards having more management responsibility or having more cross-functional responsibility. I've seen that be positive and negative. Some people just don't enjoy that. They don't want to do it. And as a result, not very passionate about it, not very good at it. In our company, we try to differentiate people so that they're not forced into that or pigeonholed into that. But I would say it's a pretty common trend that I see.
Very interesting. And I think, it's a pretty common trend in any type of job, really, as you start learning the technical skills as you enter the profession and eventually move into more management of people and soft skills. Connor, can we move into your role and, you work perhaps in a management role into a tech company. So want to hear your perspective, where you came from first, and then what is your role? What does it involve now?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. When you graduate the Air Force Academy, that's one of the things that makes it different compared to most traditional paths or universities is you're immediately put into a officer role where, I was a logistics officer. So I immediately moved into, overseeing 20, 30 some people with no experience of what the job actually entailed. So it was very quick on the job learning, relying heavily on, the folks that have been in that office for many years and, been logisticians for, 20 plus years, full careers, and just kind of leveraging their expertise. But it was really, really neat from my perspective because, playing sports your whole life, quarterback in football, you're kind of in a somewhat of a managerial or leadership type position. So I've always been, fueled by working with people, kind of the people performance aspect of everything, whether it's sports, whether it's now business. And so it was really, really neat to kind of go from right when I graduated into a role where I could still focus on people, kind of fine tuning managerial type skills in an actual operational environment. And then that continued through. I obviously was an officer for 5 years, again, doing logistics. And then, about a year out before I was separating from active duty, I kind of was thinking, hey, what next? I was always pretty passionate about, obviously sports and then technology. And everyone says, oh, well, I'm at the intersection of sports and technology. Like, well, what does that really even mean? And so, I kind of said, hey, I have a year to explore stuff before I, really need to make a decision. And so as I explored that path, I was able to connect with some individuals in the the local Tampa, Florida area that kind of gave me the opportunity to get into an early company that at the time was focused on sports technology. We were doing education technology, so delivering different e-learning platforms to different sports organizations, and it has since kind of changed from there. But it was a great launching pad for my career to go from an officer into more of like a just full-fledged startup, where everything's volatile. You have no idea what your job is. Your job title doesn't mean anything, and you're just trying to survive. So it was a stark difference, but I'm extremely thankful. And now where I am looking back, they've all served invaluable lessons learned.
Great. So can you tell us just really briefly what your company does, maybe Game Time?
Yeah, absolutely. So Game Time, I'd like to say the easiest way we always describe it is basically we're creating a data-driven approach to a fragmented market in sports in terms of all of the information that's available. It's if you think about how all that information is used and organized, the sports industry, for whatever reason, is still very much focused on spreadsheets, Excel spreadsheets, shared documents, and so understanding that hyper-focused within football, we basically, our team kind of thought, hey, how can we centralize and organize all of this information to make it very useful for the athlete, the recruiting process for the athlete, but also for the organization that wants to recruit that athlete. And so that's sort of what we did. We were fortunate to have a true technical founder and some incredible, leadership from our CEO. And that's what we did. We started looking at football recruiting, what that process looks like from A to Z, find the gaps where data and information is misused, and basically use technology to really help create simple solutions, both for the athlete and for those organizations. So that's what it is. It's recruiting technology with a heavy data analytics side of it.
Got it. Perfect. So you touched on it a little bit, and I think Eric did too. I wanted to ask you guys You know, it's pretty different whether it's in the tech industry or in any other type of industry to work for a startup or to work for a bigger company. And obviously, I imagine that a job in tech is very different when you do it for a very small company where you perhaps do a lot of different things. And if you do it for a bigger company. So maybe can we hear like from Eric and you, Connor, on what does it look like to work for a startup? And then Han, maybe you can tell us from your perspective, working for a bigger company, how does that look like too? Anybody want to start?
Yeah, Eric, I'll kick it off. We'll kind of go smallest to largest. And so, yeah, for, anyone who has startup experience, when you first kick things off, it's really based on a hypothesis with a couple of your, buddies and partners. And you're saying, hey, how can we prove that our hypothesis is correct or that we're actually solving a problem? And so from day one, you're forced to be very agile and very flexible in terms of what your role is or what you're asked to do. So, even myself, not being having a technological background, learning some of those things in terms of, hey, how do we look at data? How can that help us frame decisions moving forward versus just trying to, grow partnerships and sell and do this and that. So I think in a startup world, you're asked to do a lot and, things pivot very quickly. So what you're doing today might be different than tomorrow versus, a week or 6 months from now. So one thing that I've learned is just, really, in sports did a great job of teaching this, which is never be too high, never be too low, because the only thing that's constant in the world is change. And so it's no different with a small company. It's just always being open to knowing that there could be pivots, there could be changes, and just be flexible and always be curious, always be open to learning your new role or your new, job and what's needed to get done.
Yeah. Eric, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, I worked at a company, I think that was more or less a little under 10,000 people. And then I think the smallest was around like mid 30s. And now, like I said, it's like 250 or so. So I think on the small side, I know, things can be, I mean, there's definitely more freedom and more autonomy, I think, at an individual level. But with that, at times it can become rather disorganized if you're not careful. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, I suppose a small sample size, just kind of having one of each of those experiences. But now, like, we're at a 250 person startup. We're kind of in growth to high growth mode right now. And it's nice. I mean, I can't speak to the engineering side, but in sales, I mean, we certainly have some processes in place that are used kind of as, a starting point, I suppose. But it's a good combination of having some flexibility, some sort of process to fall back on, is particularly when you're getting started. And then as you get more comfortable, as you speak with more people and kind of understand the landscape better, you can kind of be more creative as you grow into the role. So that's kind of, I really like that, as opposed to, there are certainly a lot of positives at every job I've been at. I don't mean to be critical, but certainly at the largest company that I worked at, it was pretty somewhat restrictive in terms of like the process and how we do things, what we look for, etc. So, they kind of prioritize the collective progress over the individual experimenting for the sake of the whole. So, yeah.
Absolutely. The bigger the company, the more structured and process driven it is. Han, do you want to share from your experience how the work is organized and what you have experienced in your position with your company?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked at small companies, big companies.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try to add something a little bit different, because I do think, overall industries, working at a small company versus a big company, there's a lot in common. But at least my experience with a tech company, there's some other factors that I think really do drive the environment a little bit more than just pure company size. A lot of it, I think, has to do not only with team size, but team maturity. So if you're working on, as Connor alluded to, something where the project that you're working on is truly a startup, I think, regardless of the company size, there is a little bit of what Connor described. So you could be working at Microsoft, but if it's a greenfield new research project where you have a team of 3 people, then you're going to be forced into wearing a lot of different hats of being very agile to try to adjust to your, what the current progress is and what the market says and all those different things. So I think those 2 factors matter. And another factor that matters is just the culture that the leadership of the team and the company is trying to drive. I think that to me is one of the areas where maybe it differs the most between a small company and a big company. So at a small company, each team's leadership, I think, is going to have a lot more flexibility to drive their own team culture versus at a big company. I think a lot of that is coming from the top. I think it's a little bit more difficult to really drastically defer from the rest of the company. So that's one area where I do think that see sort of the most differences. But I just want to throw that out there as some other factors other than just the size of the overall company.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is really great insight into the work of different size company and how things are driven and organized. I'm going to shift a little bit in thinking about student athlete and perhaps where they are in their thought process with regard to their jobs after college. What do you think is a good path to get into the tech industry? And what do you think about education? Should they be pursuing a traditional college degree in computer science? Is there different ways to get into the industry? And do you have any recommendation for athletes that are in college or getting into college?
Yeah, I mean, certainly open to other opinions. I mean, on the technical side, I don't know. I can't speak as much to specifically computer science because there are a lot of online, like Lambda School and, all of these different accelerator kind of boot camps. But certainly on the engineering side, if you do want to pursue engineering, you have to have like a formal degree. There are rare circumstances where that's not the case. I know a lot of companies are dropping their requirement for a degree, but all that being said, when you show up for the interview, obviously you still have to be incredibly proficient with computer science or with engineering and show your capability. So maybe we start there, Han, if you want to add on, and then before we transition to the sales side.
Yeah, I think there are, as you mentioned, there's like more and more paths to get into the industry just from a purely technical side. We might talk later about some different roles that are not software engineer, but for software engineers, like as Eric mentioned, there are boot camps. I wanted to touch on that really quickly because I think they're becoming more and more common where people do the boot camp and then they kind of get into a job. My experience is I think the boot camps are great to do to be able to get into a position, especially something like an internship. I do think that athletes who pursue that path should expect to be doing some other education following that, even as they get into work, in order to really be successful if they want to continue pursuing the technical path. Because just like any other profession or whatever sport you're doing, and there's a lot below the surface that a boot camp doesn't teach you. So it might teach you some of the basic skills, and you might be able to perform some of the professional skills, but it's not really in enough depth to where you have the foundational knowledge to compete with other people who have done a traditional education. Luckily, I think there are more and more programs out there that are filling that void. So if you look at something like Launch School or something like that, that gives you a longer program, a more in-depth, slower paced program, something like that can help you fill in some of the gaps. And there are a bunch of programs now springing up like that, I think, to really solve that problem. So outside of just a traditional four-year education or a trade school, I think there are different ways to get in. And the thing I'll stress is I think it's really important to take initiative to try to have some kind of internship, because that not only will allow you to get exposed to some different environments and find out if engineering or technical path is really for you, but also it makes getting in the door a lot easier without necessarily being subject to a stricter requirement before being admitted or on the job as just trying to find employment right off the bat. So
Yeah. Connor, is there anything you want to add on this topic specifically?
I was just going to add that, from a non-technical, standpoint or background, there's really, there's a million different ways into the industry. Han alluded to it. There's so many different positions and teams at different sizes. In every size of a company or an organization, within tech or not, it requires different strengths and different team members. So I think, when I think about it, kind of pulling all of the sheets off, it's, if you want to find your way in the door, find people who are in that door, and start just talking to them, networking, understanding how they got there. Just listening to, Eric and Han's backstory is different than my backstory. Mm-hmm. Yet we all fall within technology right now, or what technology is. And so, I think the biggest thing is, even if you don't know where to start, just start, and have those conversations with folks who have taken that first step. Because there's a lot of different ways to get in the door. And once you get in that door, you'll start to see, oh, maybe I do have the skills to be an engineer and I can go down that path. Or, really my mindset and my skills are more for the operations side of it, or the sales side. And that will help you kind of navigate the path.
Yeah. And as we talk about this, can you, and Han touched on it a little bit, so maybe that's an answer for you, but can you educate us a little bit on what type of jobs we can find in the tech industry? So we often think about the software developer, the technical sales. Can you give us some example of other type of jobs that are typical in that space?
Yeah, sure. So just from my experience, there are a few interesting jobs that are not software engineering that you can get into. One that more and more is tied to being a software engineer is like quality assurance, or being a tester. Some of those positions are more about automated testing, where you're basically a software engineer at that point, whereas others are more manual testing. So it's all about really understanding the product and attention to detail and all those things, and really working with the development team. Some of the other more interesting, I think, to me at least, positions are a lot of technical tech companies are doing Agile now. So product owners are a position that's available all over the place. And I think it's a lot easier to get in from an educational perspective, because the main role of that job is really to help drive the vision of the product, to help drive the requirements of the product. A lot of it is about interacting with potential users of that product and really understanding what's going to make that product successful for the users. So back when I was doing more government contracting, for example, a lot of the product owners that we had were ex-military people who were, analysts in the military and stuff like that, because they had used these products before, all these analytics tools and stuff that we were developing. So for athletes, Connor, I think, is a great example of someone who came from sport, and there are plenty of sports applications out there that are really made for people who are in the sports industry. So that's one area where I think it's a clear advantage for athletes who already have domain knowledge there. So those are a couple ones that I'll highlight. There are obviously a ton more.
Yeah, just to hop in real quick, and with how I think you described it perfectly. I think, even within technology, something as simple as, hey, is it business-based or is it consumer-based? Understanding kind of what company or business you'd like to be in, because if it's consumer-based, right now, social media is, has been basically the larger part of what this last decade has been about, and so that plays a key role. So, when you look at marketing, digital marketing, growth hacking, acquisition of, people, right, or athletes or whatever it might be, there's a lot of roles that go into that on the consumer side. And then on the business side, if it's traditional, B2B sales, or SaaS, well, then that's more of a traditional sales path that I'm sure, Eric, having his experience can probably elaborate on as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that's said. I think if there was one other position, without going down the rabbit hole of all the different positions you can get into, if you do have a technical background already, just to distinguish in sales, you can have, like right now, as an account executive, I am more in a pure sales role. So that's pretty much my responsibility. Anytime that a customer has an involved question or wants to maybe do it like a proof of concept, there is kind of an intermediate that's not a direct engineer, called like a sales engineer or support engineer. I was kind of in that a little bit in my first role, though it was engineering focused. And basically that kind of leverages the in-between. You're kind of the intermediary between engineering and sales. So like I mentioned, like you're going to be more technically rooted, and kind of you're going to be a product expert in the sense of the technology behind it, as opposed to leading the vision and building onto it generally. So what that would look like from a workflow is like I'm kind of the first point of contact to reach out to the individual, or if they've requested contact for a certain project that they have, I'll reach out, understand the project, kind of put a rough framework or scope around the size, the needs, and then if it warrants a discussion with our engineering team, they're kind of the intermediary between. So they would kind of walk through the product more in depth, face to face with the customer. So that's kind of, I think we've done all the major positions unless I'm forgetting one.
Just to hop in, one more that I remember, if you're sort of more into like have an artistic background, I think there are a lot of opportunities in tech that people don't necessarily think about. So Connor talking about all the social media stuff kind of jogged my memory on that. Like there's so many companies that are more into sort of social media marketing and digital sort of engagement. A lot of those platforms engage directly with customers and do a lot of, for example, the ad design and campaign design. And they do hire a lot of people who are more on the art side, whether it's illustration or whatever. So just because you're not interested in tech doesn't mean you can't work in the tech industry. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had asked this original question on the education and the past to get into the industry, sort of to lead you into, is this a career that you could pursue while you're still competing in your sport? Because I think, for a lot of athletes, they struggle to be able to do their sport and have a career at the same time, especially after they're done with college. If they're not like in a pro sport like football or basketball. And so I was curious if the tech industry or certain job in the tech industry gives you some flexibility that could allow you to do that and continue on a career while working at the same time, whether it's full-time or part-time.
Yeah, I'll lead that one off. That's a tough question. It's a very tough question. Just because I'd like to think that when I was competing that I was, I could have taken time to learn about the industry or, focus on, hey, what's next? But looking back, that for me, at least, that wasn't really the case. When I was competing at a high level, my, job was to compete at a high level, and everything that went into that. And so if I could, I hate to ever have, hindsight's always 20/20, and, I hate to have regrets, but if I could ever tell myself, my younger self, anything, it would be, hey, like, diverse your thoughts and your experiences and just your perspective amongst everything, because the only title, somebody shared this with me recently and I loved it, which was the only title that all athletes will ever share is former. So it's always going to end in former, for one reason or another, and hopefully you have a great long career, but it's never too early to start exploring what life after sports looks like.
Eric, do you have any thoughts on this since you are working and competing?
Yeah, so I guess to distinguish between the two, so beach is a little more relaxed, I would say, than like the indoor, the requirement for training. That's not to say that I don't take it seriously and whatnot, but I can actually give perspective when I was an engineer. So particularly in 2018, when I was at the small company, I was working and playing full time. And like at one point I was actually installing the cellular system in the Atlanta Falcons Stadium. And so I took their rail system at 6 a.m. to the stadium, worked until 2, went directly to the airport, flew to Germany, had 7 days of 2-a-days, flew back and had to work on Sunday at 6 a.m. Because I had already used up my vacation for previous tournaments in the year. And like, it can be done, I suppose, but it is incredibly strenuous. And like, it was not sustainable, to be honest. And I mean, there's a ton that I could get into that's outside of the context of this call, but basically for like a full-time engineering role and full-time sport, it's incredibly challenging. And like, it got to the point where there were days where I didn't play my best, and it was frustrating because I knew if I had the ability at that time to train full-time, then, you know, perhaps I could have been at a higher level. So it was, you know, I'm very happy that I had all the opportunities that I did, but it was incredibly challenging to pursue both in a full-time capacity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it definitely sounds intense, and it's really impressive. But I guess for someone that wants to get into this industry, and more we've been encouraging athletes to like start getting some experience in whatever industry they want to get into, and maybe that would be an easier path, I suppose, to prepare yourself for the tech industry or a job as an engineer if you had more so like short internship or part-time experiences on the side rather than trying to pursue the two careers at the same time. Does that seem like more of a, I see hand nodding, so I'm guessing that this is more of an option.
Yeah, I would say so. I'd say in my experience, like a lot of it depends on your sport and sort of the phase of your athletic career. So like for me, table tennis isn't NCAA, so I was sort of on my own schedule during college, and I could design my schedule around that. So I had a little bit more flexibility to say work part-time or do something like that. Also didn't have all the, you know, the NCAA restrictions on me as a result. So I was able to do that. But for other sports, it's not really an option. And to Eric's point, I think a lot of it is also down to, I think everybody has a different level of comfort or different threshold of how much they can take on at one time. And it's just important for everybody who sort of goes down that path to be honest with themselves and really reflect on whether you're happy with what you're doing or whether you're, you know, suffering from a mental health perspective by trying to take on everything you're taking on. So to me, it's going to be, the answer is going to be different from person to person. But if you do have like an off season or something where your schedule is lighter in your sport and you're able to take on, say, like a part-time internship, that's something I would recommend rather than trying to essentially work two jobs at the same time, because that's what you're doing. I think for most sports, if you're trying to do both your athletic career and like a full-time job at the same time. So I just don't think, as Eric mentioned, I don't know how sustainable that is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the other thing I'll just add in real quick is we all have Google in our lives, and you can be amazed at how much you can learn on, you know, a quick web search or YouTube sprint. I remember I used to block out an hour every day just to learn the terminology and the verbiage in the tech industry, and try and equip myself that way. So you can teach yourself quite a bit.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion, actually, and a good segue into asking you guys what skills or traits that you see in athletes are very valuable for a career in tech. What you guys have transferred. Can you give us some example? What you use from your sporting career and you're using in your jobs now? Anybody want to start?
I can start on that one. I would say a lot of things, so cut me off if I start rambling. But I know, you know, for any Americans that aren't familiar with team handball, it's really high scoring. And as a goalkeeper, on your best days, you're getting scored on 6 or 7 out of 10 shots. And so, you know, like you know, when you're calling prospecting customers, you are going to get rejected. You are going to have people who don't want to talk to you at all. And like, it's really strange, but almost in a very like cathartic way. The first time I called someone and they didn't want to talk to me and just hung up the phone, it was like it instantly triggered, like I had just been scored on and like wanted, you know, like I knew I could do it better next time and just like went straight back into it. So maybe from like a mentality standpoint, but I would say even more so, one thing that I really do like about sales as opposed to like previous engineering roles, and it's not to say all engineering roles were like this, but at least in my experience, I have a ton of flexibility with the way I structure my day. And like, as an example, when you go to a practice, you can almost in a way shut your logical mind off because you have your program laid out for the day. So you're doing this drill for 10 minutes, this for whatever, etc. You kind of know the flow of that. And I can very much establish my day that way. I have a lot of freedom in how I structure my day and what I want to do. So I can kind of set up a game plan that way and just execute on it without even really having to, obviously I'm putting thought into it, but having to worry about it. And the discipline that I gained being like a full-time engineering student athlete and working full-time and training at the same time, just played really well into that. So I think more, and I guess capping all of that off, in an engineering role, to some extent, you're given the projects that you need to accomplish and to build out. And in sales, it's very much dependent on what you do. Like you are responsible for your outcome in a different way than engineering. So I think that really played into it.
Yeah, I hear you talking about the daily routine and the discipline using, it's very similar to the athletic world as well as the competitiveness and being in control of your performance, basically. Han, is there specific skills that you carried over from table tennis and sport into maybe the technical side of your job, or
there's plenty. I'll touch on a couple of them. I think one thing is most technical education focuses on like technical skills and technologies and stuff like that. I find in the real world, most technical roles are more about working effectively and communicating effectively with people. And I think that translates really well for most athletes, even athletes in individual sports. I think to learn a lot about how to operate in a team dynamic and how to be successful in that dynamic, how to deal with conflict, all of those things. I think that translates really, really well. And then the one other thing I'll touch on out of all of them is, in my opinion, not just with tech, but with all industries, the people who really survive and thrive are the ones who can be self-reflective and improve on themselves. I think athletes, like elite athletes, naturally have learned that, right? Like none of us succeed if we can't have this internal feedback loop and understand where we're making mistakes and how we can do things better and be able to take criticism and coaching well. All of those things I think are incredibly valuable and transcend like whatever industry you're working in, definitely in tech. So.
Yeah. Connor, do you want to add anything from your side?
To be honest, I think they both hit it pretty much on the head from my standpoint. The three I always think of, talk about being competitive. Yeah, it's intrinsic motivation, especially in a smaller company. As you grow, there's many days that you have to find your own motivation, similar to, anyone playing a sport. There's some days where right when you think you're at your peak, you got to find a way to, go and become better. Han mentioned it too, always kind of understanding that there will be issues and problems and how do you face adversity. So same in sports, right? If Eric's getting scored on 7 times, you never get too low. And if they win, you never get too high. So I think I always frame where when I look to surround myself with people in the business world, I kind of reflect back to, they're very similar to folks that I try to surround myself in the athletic world, which are got people that never get too low and never get too high. They're kind of that even keel. And that helps you operate, I think, in all settings.
And I'm gonna ask the silly question that often people sort of have to their mind when they think about the tech industry. We sort of have this preconceived idea that it's all about science and math, and you need to be good at math. But I'm curious from your perspective about creative skills, analytical skills. There seems to be problem solving. There seems to be a lot of other type of trait and skills that would be useful. So is it all about math, or can you enter the industry with a different approach and a different range of skills?
Yeah, I think from my end, it's definitely not. I mean, the way I approach it is I like to think I can maybe make some sense of some data in math, but certainly not my background. I'm sure, I think there's a reason that, the success that we've had is really in part of a true technical co-founder who has an engineering and development background, right, and his team. But I think in any company or any industry, there's other elements. And I think it's just how you mesh those all together is what, ultimately kind of gives you your end result. So, I think a good example recently is we always try and take the approach of like, hey, data-driven approach. How are the numbers telling us what we should do next? And then let's work around that. But, even when COVID hit, right, there's really no numbers that can associate, hey, how do you handle that or what that's going to be? And so there's always elements in a tech company or outside of a tech company that I think there needs to be there can always be, an empathetic approach, another perspective approach to how can we look at what's happening and put kind of our own eyes, our own vision, our own beliefs behind it and navigate forward.
Yeah, and I think that sort of is similar to what you have said before in terms of adaptability and flexibility, and the fact that you need to adjust to change. Those are not, they don't necessarily relate to math, but just some skills that athletes definitely have developed over the years, just with regard to going to competition and traveling and anything that could arise from practice. Eric, you were gonna add something, no?
Yeah, I mean, so much is role dependent. I mean, again, like if you do want to get into a more technical role, and I can't speak to product management so much, but certainly the more technical you go, like you gotta have, so you're going to use analytical things in your job every day. So it's kind of, you can't necessarily go without it. I would say, I don't know if we've clarified, I mean, even in like deeper tech companies, you don't necessarily need a technical degree to get into sales. I mean, it's certainly a value add. And I would say the benefit that I have having a technical foundation is the ability to communicate with them more on that level. I guess it's maybe hard to explain if you haven't experienced it so much, Han. I don't know how much you interact with sales teams for different solutions, but sometimes you can tell when there are people who really understand the product and not. Some of that you're just going to gain through experience as well. It's not to say that like if you don't have a degree, you're not capable of doing it. But you can really tell when someone understands it. So I would just say, if you are going to a technical company, even in a technical sales role, maybe not in the strict math STEM sense, but I know, like Connor mentioned it earlier, like you're going to have to hit Google a ton, especially early on in your after hours, figure out what all this technology means and like just throw it into your head until you get a firm understanding of the landscape, the technology itself, even the words that they're using to talk about how, like the end users, the words that they use and the way that they communicate about your product. So yeah, in short, no, but elongated, like you're going to have to study up a lot. So you can't totally avoid it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think both Eric and Connor I definitely agree with everything that they've said. I think even in my job, in a more technical role, in software engineering, just like any other team, like everybody on the team has a different role. So there's some foundational knowledge that you might want to have, but not everybody, like I'm a good example, not everybody is like, up to their neck in the math and all of the different, really, especially really higher level math, right? So other people are bringing value in different ways. So for me, for example, I'm much more on the process improvement side much of the time, of really analyzing how is our team working, where are the areas where we need to improve, and really managing the team on that front. That's where I feel like I provide the most value. Overall, I feel like the most important skill outside of just like even math, science, whatever, is the industry just changes so fast. I think just having the passion, the drive to learn, and really understanding how you learn best, I think are way more important than having any sort of specific mathematical skills or degree or whatever. So
Absolutely, and as we're talking about fast change, and I can imagine too, for any company at the moment, it's very hard to plan and see what's going to happen in 3 months, and it's the same for the athlete. I want to wrap it up with some question around the economy right now, and what are your recommendations for seniors that have graduated or junior seniors that are looking at entering the market, the job market in the next couple of of months or years. You know, we always think of the tech industry as a growing industry. Can you tell us example of space in the industry that are specifically growing, that maybe athletes can turn to? And my second question would be also, you know, how do you get your foot in the door? What would be your number one recommendation? So one, tell us, you know, which part of the industry is growing that you would look into, and second, how to get into it. And we can, if you want to start, Connor, and then we'll go through each one of you.
Sure. Yeah, you know, I think one thing that we can take away from the most recent months are the virtual space and the tech space. We knew it was growing. We knew it was booming. I think this even accelerated, you know, where we were going to be. I mean, you've seen companies like Twitter talk, you know, obviously, hey, virtual office, you know, here on moving forward. So I think inevitably it's going to continue to grow. You know, we're doing some things right now in the virtual event space. So helping organizations run events, but virtually, right? So they're not bound by having a camp on site in Los Angeles, right? They can have a camp wherever they want. That's open to every athlete in the world. So I think you're gonna continue to see that trend. Obviously, fintech and ed tech right now are two booming industries. I think education technology I think they saw the largest boom in venture capitalism or in venture dollars since for the past decade. So these are, during COVID, which is quite a statement. So I think these will all continue to grow. And, you know, my thought would be to break into the door or get your foot in the door. Han mentioned it. If you're not passionate about something, you're probably not going to be your best version or your best self at it. So find what you're passionate about or what interests you. And then it's literally follow someone on LinkedIn, connect with them, send them a note, try and have a quick call with them. Or if there's someone at your school, a professor, see if they'll grab coffee. You'd be amazed at how many people are willing to have a conversation. And the greatest form, or the greatest compliment is asking for advice or asking for perspective. And so people will be willing to do that. And if you do, you just take that step, you'll be surprised at the doors that open.
I'll speak directly as well to kind of the more sales side. Generally at like tech companies, I don't know how it's set up with you, Connor, but you kind of have a sales development or a business development representative is kind of your entry level in, and then you work up to an account executive. And at that point, you generally keep working up to larger companies, if you will. So, you may target companies 0 to 100 million in revenue, and then 100 million to $1 billion, and then $1 billion plus is kind of the progression outside of management. I would say from getting in, you definitely do not need a technical degree. As you mentioned, I just want to restate that. I don't know that we said it, enough, because I think some people can be really worried about that, like going into an interview, even at like where I'm at with a database company. Like, I do have a technical background. I very minimally worked with databases before I was at MariaDB. But all that to say, I think when you're breaking in, a few things, like if you're interested in sales, I think it can be a very great and lucrative career. Like athletics, there are a lot of people that want to play sports. There are fewer and fewer that are very, very, very good at it. And that takes time, repetition, and that very much resonates with my athletic experience. So I think there's something to be said about that. Certainly finding something, if you don't know databases, but if you like where the company is, it's a startup, it's growing, or whatever the size is where you want to be. And then more from like a practical or an execution standpoint, in addition to reaching out to the hiring manager via LinkedIn, use your resume to be very concise, show that you can communicate well, quantify your results. So if every year you were on your team, you progressed, and your team had a better record, or you accomplished different awards, like make that very clear. If you had an internship and you saved the company $10,000, like put those numbers on there. And then, if when you're showing up to an interview as well, like generally speaking, everyone that comes into a sales interview is generally more extroverted, driven, and whatever. And the problem that I see with a lot of people interviewing is that they'll come in and that's like what they want to promote. And it's like, well, all the 15 to 20 people that walked in here are energetic, they're driven, they're all of that. How do I know that you want to sell exactly what we're making? What convinces me that you're not interviewing just like this and showing your enthusiasm at all of the places that you're looking at right now? So really come in pointed, understand the product like in and out. And even if it's like starting with Googling, what is a database? What is MariaDB? Who uses MariaDB? Like painstakingly spending like hours, borderline days, weeks, like understanding that. So you come in the interview, even if you're wrong, if you show how much you've learned on your own, that is a huge selling point versus someone that comes in and knows it and can't even hold a conversation. So I'm rambling. I apologize. Thanks for for listening to that. But
No, that was very clear, and definitely being super pointed and being able to show your competitive advantage when you go to the interview is really important. At least that's what I got. That's great.
Yeah, you know, it's the difference between saying like, hey, I want to be in sales versus like, hey, I want to sell MariaDB's database. Like kind of embodying that in your resume and the way you communicate in your research and preparation. So
yeah. Han, do you want to give us your perspective on the industry and how you would want to get into it?
Yeah, so get even more specific with an example that Connor brought up around the virtual space. I think the virtual and remote work space in particular, I think more and more companies are going to come out of this pandemic seeing that it's not only doable, but in some ways beneficial if you have the right workforce for it. So I think that space is gonna continue to grow incredibly, not only with the obvious things, but like video conferencing and stuff like that, but also a lot of tooling around remote teams. So I think like the first days of the lockdown, a lot of like European countries like Microsoft Teams like just went down because of the load. So a lot of products that are geared around remote work, those companies are going to continue to see growth and continue to hire. And then in a space that I know well, like government contracting is continuing to remain stable. So if people are interested in that sort of space, especially, I know a lot of people, at least where I grew up, had a passion for defense contracting and some of the cool work that you can do on that front. That's an area where it's always pretty interesting. And that's a passion of yours to be able to learn more about that. In terms of getting your foot in the door, Connor and Eric already brought up a lot of really good points. I think every hiring manager is going to be a little bit different. So being able to ask questions and not be bashful to asking questions to either the hiring manager or HR or wherever you're applying is incredibly, like, there's nothing wrong about doing it. The worst answer you're going to get is no, we can't tell you. But I mean, like, it doesn't hurt to try to figure out, really dig into that job description, ask the question, try to figure out what exactly they're looking for. Like for me, I'm always looking for, especially in a more junior level position, what I already described. Like I'm looking for people who are humble, willing to learn. They know kind of what they want out of their careers. I can see that drive. So if someone can tell me, these are things that I'm really, really interested in learning. And if I ask them a question, they're not trying to give me some kind of vague answer because they don't know. They might just tell me, hey, this is what I know about the topic, but here are areas where I want to learn more. Like people who are really straight shooters. To me, I much prefer that over someone I'm going to give a task and then I'm not going to hear from them for a week. They're not going to ask for help. And there's too much pride there that's just a waste of time for everybody. So I think it's going to be different from place to place. But overall, I think being honest about what you don't know, coming in ready to ask good questions, I think really tells me a lot that you're invested in the position, that you're really interested in our company or the work that we're doing. Says just as much about yourself as any answers that you give me. So those are just a few basics that I would advise people to do.
Awesome, great. So we came to the end of our webinar, and appreciate your contribution from all three of you and your insight in the industry. I guess as a last word, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to add or highlight for the industry before we end here?
I would say one other thing, we don't have to dive super deep into it, but whether it's technically like making websites or certain projects, or from the sales side showing initiative, like whether it's raising money for a nonprofit or even having like a small side business, like those side projects can always help. And I think particularly on the technical side, if you've taken the initiative to build something more or less for fun because you like it, but you're actually making something of quality, that will hold a lot of weight as opposed to someone who did all of their assignments that they were given and got good grades, but didn't do any side projects, didn't make things for fun because they could. That's one thing I think I would definitely add.
That's a great point. Anything else, guys?
Yeah, I'll mention something. I think for a lot of people who aren't familiar with tech, something that I see a lot is people see Silicon Valley and see all this stuff, and their idea when it comes to tech is like, I'm going to come up with something and get rich, like get rich quick scheme kind of deal. I'd really advise against thinking about tech that way. You know, as Eric mentioned, if you have a side project that you're passionate about and it turns into something, by all means, that's great. But I wouldn't go into tech with that mindset that I'm going to try to find the next big thing and the next get rich quick scheme.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to burn out very, very, very quickly. I think it's more important to figure out what work you really enjoy doing. And a lot of it is about, as everybody's mentioned, about rigor, about discipline, about working with people. So.
I think this is a great point, Han, because the reality is just like sport. Even if you get rich from tech, the likelihood is that you have done so much work, just like you did in your sporting career. It's not something that happens overnight. So definitely an interesting myth that doesn't exist. There's no shortcut. Connor, any last word from you?
I'll just add on. Yeah, Han hit it right on the head where it's, you know, people try and follow trends. So even talking right now, hey, where's tech headed? Someone told us early on, or told me early on, if you're trying to, you know, grab a hold of the trend or be the next trend, you're already too late, and you're not it. So to Han's point, you know, just don't I would argue against that approach. I would always argue against the approach of, hey, what are you passionate about? What are you interested in? And if there's problems or ways that you can make that better, do that, because that will ultimately succeed and make you intrinsically motivated to grow. And so, you know, there's been a lot of discussion, hey, how do you get in the door? What do you do? And just like athletes, right? If you don't know the answer, what do? You go for, if you're out of shape, you go for a run, right? If you need to, you know, lift, you go see your strength coach. So just start doing something, and take initiative, and that will lead to all of your answers.
Great. That's a fantastic point to end on. I love it. Taking initiative and get going, doing something. I think it's awesome. Guys, thank you for the time today. I hope that you have a lovely weekend. Thank you for helping us out with Athletes All and sharing your experience. It's much appreciated. And then stay safe out there, and then have a fantastic weekend. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks.